feel like sitting to start with. Thanks so much to Mariana for having us back here again. She's really a class act and does a lot of really good work. This is just, yeah, absolutely. Such a valuable thing to be able to meet like this. I actually think that the discussion that we had to start with the forum situation was actually a really good sort of lead into what I wanted to talk about. It actually all ties together. And it's a good platform to sort of launch from. I'm going to be touching on all of those subjects in different degrees. They're all really my main areas of interest, I think, and hopefully you guys are pretty into it too. When Mariana says I'll talk about Kundalini activations, that's one of the things in particular I wanted to talk about in context, in a bigger context, but also there aren't many speakers who are bringing... We have a lot of awesome speakers and information and a lot of interesting information and facts and figures and all this being shared, but not so much stuff that actually is useful in terms of, well, here's a tool that you can use to actually evolve yourself and become something more like you would ideally like to be. So one of the particular things we're going to hone in on is actually a system for doing that. So it's not just interesting facts or things that I find interesting, hopefully you will too, but it's actually, here's something that I know happens to be a very powerful evolutionary tool, so we're going to talk about that as well. So basically, that's me. I referred to myself there as an indigo/star child because I thought it might have a little bit of a resonance with this group. And I thought that it was interesting that when we were speaking earlier, this idea that we are being manipulated and engineered by these other intelligences, and the word subtle was mentioned by Mariana, and I thought, yeah, there's a lot of subtle stuff going on in the ways that we are being influenced and tinkered with, and choosing to participate in this process, and sometimes choosing before we incarnate, and then forgetting it when we when the veil comes down and we get into the body, we forget the arrangements that we've made before we incarnate. But I think there's also nothing particularly subtle about certain star beings, if you want to call them that, directly incarnating into physical bodies as a direct intervention into the system and the situation here on the planet at this point in time. It's about as unsubtle as you can get, and that's probably a fair description of me and what I do. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I wrote this particular book. I hate self-promoting, but I have to do it because I didn't spend 5 years as a hermit writing it so that no one could read it. So I'm going to let you know that it exists. And the most recent feedback I got is actually this bottom testimonial here from Lisa Schwartz in the US, who's insisting that all of her trainers who teach her model read the book, as well as putting it on the must-read list for her classes and telling them about it verbally. Thank you for this masterpiece, the world needs it. So, that said, please check it out. Like I said, I spent 5 years as a hermit, broke on the poverty line or below it, just basically researching and writing, and that was really my entire focus. You could say that I lived quite an unbalanced life at that point in time, but when you have to do something, you have to do it. So one of the things that we did was we co-founded, Amy and I, this Global Freedom Movement entity, and so we have our Sunday night show. We interview people, all sorts of people from different disciplines, different areas of expertise, from anything you can think of, really, from structured water to reptilians. We cover the whole gamut. We've been trying to get Simon Parkes on for a little bit, but that's been challenging with his schedule. Last week we spoke to James Bartley, who was fascinating and had a lot of good information to share. We'll probably have him back to talk as well. 2 weeks ago we spoke to a guy about ultrasound. So we cover the whole spectrum of things. We really operate from a sort of a big picture perspective and try to just offer an educational platform that people can take and really benefit from. It's stuff that's not going to get covered in the mainstream media. So this is the whole point of being independent media, is that we're not in anyone's pocket, and we're not beholden to anyone, and we can tell the truth. So yeah. With this particular system, I'm going to talk about the Solfeggio scale and sound and healing and intention and all this sort of stuff. one of the things that Dr. Larry Dossey has brought us is this 3 eras of medicine breakdown. And so everyone's familiar with, like, on the left-hand side, you'll see era 1, genetics. We're all pretty familiar with that sort of mentality, that paradigm. It's all about only matter matters, basically. It's all about the physical body and your random DNA codes and genetic fatalism. Basically, what you inherit from your parents is what you get, and you're stuck with it. Then we sort of got into era 2, epigenetics, where people started to realize the mind-body connection and how powerful that can be. And then we eventually started to move into era 3, which is metagenetics, which is my, out of these paradigms, definitely the area of most interest to me, because this particular modality, which is called the regenetics method, is actually an era 3 modality. So we're actually utilizing sound in combination with intention, in combination with the heart space, or love, in other words. Excuse me. So the cool thing about that whole paradigm is it actually reverses the fundamental precepts of era 1 genetics, and it says, consciousness is the ground of reality. That's your starting point. It's infinite, it's beginningless, it's timeless, and from there, your mind can be directed across space and time through dimensions and what have you to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, which is, to a large extent, those weird and wonderful things are the subject of this particular book here. So this paradigm here encompasses this regenetics method where we're dealing with, I'll just take a fork out here, we're dealing with the Solfeggio scale. Can anyone hear? Can you hear that? Yep. That's actually the 528 hertz frequency, which is the only frequency that we use for the first DNA activation. DNA activation, Kundalini activation, it's doing both at once. We're dealing with multidimensional DNA as well, so I'm going to talk about the different DNA templates that we all have, and that's quite an interesting topic in itself. So the basic thing that I like about this era 3 medical paradigm is that we're actually starting to wake up now and snap out of this sort of Newtonian, Cartesian trance that we've been in, and realize that we're actually really creative beings at base. We're fundamentally powerful. And that's where this modality fits. We talk about all these weird phenomena like remote healing and remote viewing and astral body sort of stuff, out-of-body experiences. It's a total inversion of the era 1 viewpoint where we're just these meat sacks and these physical bodies that, just sort of trundle along and reproduce and pay taxes and break down and die. This is an invitation in a way. This paradigm's an invitation to take personal responsibility and to be accountable for ourselves, and to in the process that means taking hold of our creativity and our intentionality and really not choosing to be victims anymore, because that's the medical paradigm of materialism is fundamentally it really embraces the victim archetype. It actually is really based in that sort of mentality. I'm just going to see if I can stand here. So, excuse me. So that's what I'm getting at people here. I'm trying to get through to people is, it's not just the abstract level of, hey, we're really powerful and we've got all this amazing stuff going on that we can do and blah blah blah. But here's a tool that we can actually use to access that power in a really simple way. It's like the lazy man's ultimate way of activating. This is 3 stages of my basic background. I'll run you through it really quickly. I woke up because of a book called The Holographic Universe. Some heads nodding. That was by a physicist, Michael Talbot, and he wrote it, I think it was published in 91 or something, the early 90s. And he basically took that holographic concept and applied it to reality at large and internally at a biological level as well, and it blew my mind. It completely undermined and destroyed my vague concepts about the nature of reality. At that point in time, I just didn't really have any set ideas. I was just kind of lazy and not that interested in whatever. But I read the book and I was like, oh my God, everything we think, we just assume about reality is just garbage, it's wrong. So I read it about 3 or 4 times because I was just so blown away by it and wanted to soak it up. I was about 20 at the time, and that was because my brother came home from school one day and said, this guy came to school and gave a talk, and he mentioned this book and I think you'd be into it. So 6 months later I got onto it and read it, and that I would say I would probably have one way or another ended up doing this kind of work, but that particular book was the first stage of initiation. That was the catalyst for getting onto this path. So shortly after that, with this holographic concept of reality in my head, I actually had an experience, a conscious experience of what that's like, of accessing a holographic reality. So I was lying in bed and I was waiting to go to sleep, and my mind basically must have just quietened down for a moment. And in that split second of emptiness, I was the universe. I encountered infinity, and I was beginningless, endless, timeless, eternal, and my awareness was a non-verbal one, because it's a non-verbal reality, but it was translated in my mind into I am the universe and the universe is me. And then as I mentally engaged with that concept, I snapped out of it and ended the experience. So that was the second stage, because it crystallized my sort of conceptual ideas that the holographic universe had brought me. So now I knew from experience this is actually true. So that was a crucial stage in cementing that transformative process, taking it from an intellectual understanding into an experiential one, because ultimately, as any abductee knows, the only way you can know anything is by direct first-hand personal experience. Everything else is just a belief. You can keep questioning your own experiences and so forth, but logically, the only thing you can ever know is your own experience. So from there, I moved into the third vital stage, which was a nice kick in the guts provided by a fellow you might have heard of called David Icke. Yeah. So I read Children of the Matrix. I think I would have been 21 at the time, which is an odd time of your life to be awakening to interdimensional reptilians and so forth. But yeah, most of my friends were more concerned with 21st birthday parties and getting pissed. But I did that as well, don't get me wrong, but I was also reading about this weird stuff. So it was like the geopolitical counterpart to the big picture spiritual aspect. So now I sort of had, like, if you like, a sort of a holistic view of what was going on metaphysically and also physically on the planet, politically, how the power structure works, why we are so dysfunctional, and what's going on there. Ultimately, what David Icke did was a tremendous service to us all, because he put himself in a position to be utterly ridiculed, and he was, but he gave us core elements of truth and also gave us just the permission to talk about really out-of-the-box stuff that everyone else was too chicken shit to talk about. So he copped hell for it, but we really owe him a debt of gratitude for that, because it opened people's minds, and it also gave permission to speak about weird experiences they'd been going through. And so he toured the world and went 40-plus countries and whatever, and everywhere he went, people kept coming to him and saying, "Oh, I keep encountering these reptilians," or whatever, I've been abducted, or whatever it was. But that was what crystallized for me, if you like, the part of me that realized we need to be sort of activists as well as spiritual and what have you. So that's why we have this weird multi-dimensional entity called Global Freedom Movement. It's because while I would rather focus more on the spiritual and metaphysical and just write and research, we have to deal with the nuts and bolts of everyday experience and the weird political system and economic stuff that's foisted on us by this draconian program. Sorry? Yeah, jump in anytime. I forgot to mention, but please do, like, if you really want to ask a question as I'm going, please do. Don't wait till the end. I'd like it to be, interactive. So that's not a photo I took, just so you know. But when I was in Perth a couple of months before I left Perth to come back to Sydney, I actually saw a craft a lot like that. I looked up. I was out in the backyard of our place, and I just, for some reason, had the urge to look directly up above me in the sky. And I saw something that looked quite a bit like that. It was basically the underside of a huge orange disc. As soon as I made eye contact with it, it basically just took off and it vanished itself. It didn't vanish into the horizon. It just disappeared itself after it started to accelerate. So that was a nice little sort of contact for me. That was my first, and I think only, proper sort of UFO encounter. So I'm a contactee, technically, CE1. And so I actually like to couch things in a sort of metaphysical perspective. So I thought briefly I would go through this concept here from this is a theosophical picture on the left and the right. They're actually depicting the same exact things. So we start out with this spark of infinity, the monad up the top, which is what we are, if you like, before we assume any kind of form. It's the infinite. And then we come down to the ego, the higher self. In other words, not the human petty ego, but the higher self in the high densities, high dimensions to where we are now. The higher self incarnates into physical bodies, has these personalities in these different time streams. So the right hand picture is just basically showing how, in a linear sense, the different personalities through time, through the different bodies that we incarnate into, are rounded out and develop and sort of evolve in a sort of linear conceptual depiction. But yeah, obviously the different timelines and time streams, it would be more accurate to say they all exist at once. So it actually is related to this whole ET UFO thing, and I thought it was really good. I was really glad that the afterlife concept came up when we were talking at the forum earlier, because it's really going to be the huge, I guess, it's going to be the main pillar of my second book. So I actually wanted to show you two quotes from two very different people from two very different time periods in our modern history. And this first one's from Charles Leadbeater, who was a really well-known theosophist. And he's basically saying, he's talking about the astral planes, and he's saying the first, second, and third subdivisions of the astral comprise the so-called summerland that we hear about at spiritual seances. The interesting thing here is I'm going to compare the following quote with the one on the next slide, and I apologise for all the words. But he says, entities inhabiting these levels lose sight of the earth and its belongings, and to a large extent create their own surroundings, which are perceptible to other entities and clairvoyant vision. This region is beyond doubt the summerland of which we hear so much at spiritualist seances. It's on these planes that spirits call into temporary existence their houses, schools, and cities. A visitor who knew of nothing higher might wander contentedly among forests and mountains, lakes, pleasant flower gardens, which are superior to anything in the physical world, or he might even construct these things for himself. He wrote that was in the third edition of The Astral Plane, so that's 1900. So about 112 years later, Eben Alexander, who was a hardcore materialist neurologist, died, and his brain, his neocortex, was being eaten by a very aggressive bacterial infection, and he died. And again, like, absolutely no interest whatsoever in these ideas, but he experienced exactly what Leadbeater was talking about. So in his book, I've just quoted there, he says he's transitioned into the astral planes, and he's saying, below me there's countryside. It was green, lush, and earth-like. It was earth, but at the same time it wasn't. I was flying, passing over trees and fields and streams and waterfalls, and also people. There were children too, laughing and playing. The people sang and danced around in circles, and sometimes I'd see a dog running and jumping among them as full of joy as the people were. They wore simple clothes, and it seemed that the colours had the same kind of living warmth as the trees and flowers that bloomed and blossomed around them. So 112 years later, a hardcore neurologist, atheist, materialist has exactly the same experience as described in 1900 by Charles Leadbeater in The Astral Plane, which I find really interesting. So I'm going to talk a lot about that stuff in TGI2, which is technically actually the second half of that book. It just got too big, I had to split it in two. So the astral plane is also referred to by Tom Sawyer. Some of you might have read his book, What Tom Sawyer Learned from Dying. He describes these realms as paradise. And he describes the source, or the light, that everyone goes to the light. He describes that as essentially as God, or heaven, or whatever. But so these lower astral realms, we interpret them when we experience them as sort of these paradisical realms. They're amazing, they're beautiful, absolutely stunning, and we think it's the best thing ever, but it's actually it's just a puny fragment of what's available to us when we become aware of our options. So the near-death experiences are actually evolutionary vehicles, and so are, as I'll get to, so are all these contact experiences that so many of us are having. These so-called abduction experiences, shamanic initiations, Kundalini awakening, they're all producing very, very similar effects in the aftermath. Excuse me. This was a quote from one of my friends or acquaintances on Facebook who works in the realm of energy healing and that sort of thing. So she actually had one of these NDEs and said, I had the tunnel vision experience when I died, and it was only seconds that I was gone, but my life was not the same after that reset, and I've been on an epic adventure ever since. What was once the worst day of my life turned into the best day of my life, and I woke up to a new reality and found my mission in life. And that's what we hear from a lot of people who have a near-death experience. When they biologically are dead and return to tell the tale, they have this sense of purpose that they never had before. It's like a switch has been flicked, and a lot of researchers are linking that to a possible Kundalini awakening. And it was only actually recently that it occurred to me that my own experience of infinite consciousness may possibly have had something to do with a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. Maybe. That's just speculation. So the NDEs in particular, there's a number of researchers like Dr. Kenneth Ring, Yvonne Cason, PMH Atwater, Bruce Grayson, Gray. There's a number of others who are all linking Kundalini into this idea of it's being activated during near-death experiences, during a physical trauma, like a crisis experience, when we need these extra resources available to us, that's when it's being kicked into gear. So if you're not, is anyone not clear at all on the Kundalini thing? Like, if you've never heard of it? No, everyone's sort of got some idea. Yeah. Anthony? Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Well, it's a charge, basically. It's a reservoir of charge at the base of the spine, electrical charge. It's active in everyone to a limited degree, and it should be a lot more active in us. We've been so heavily tampered with on this planet, so heavily engineered, that we're basically functioning at a level that is like barely 10% of what we're actually capable of. And I'm going to talk about how that relates to DNA templates and all this sort of thing. But yeah, the Kundalini thing, it's been linked to near-death experiences. But obviously not everyone wants to have to die in order to evolve themselves. It's a bit of a risky thing. You don't know if you're going to come back or not. So what was a revelation to me was when I actually stumbled on this book called Conscious Healing by a guy called Sol Luckman in the US, who I've since become friends with, and actually learned this system he calls the regenetics method. And for me to actually bother learning a system and then going out there into the world and offering it to people, especially since I'm not a salesman at all, can't stand that idea, but to actually talk about it, it really has to resonate with me a lot, and I have to really, really see it as legit before I'll do that. So that's why I'm here. I'm not here because I like the sound of my voice or like to sound like a salesman. So if I do, please forgive me. I'll have to forgive myself later. So the idea is we can actually use sound and intention. Sound is a really powerful thing. It's more, if you like, elemental or primal than light. If you think of cymatics, the science of sound vibrations, and you've seen those vibrating metal plates and the little granules on them and the way that they take form as the plate vibrates, it's kind of like if you make the analogy that the grains of sand or whatever on the plate are particles of light, you can picture the frequency of the plate. If that's sound, it's actually deciding, it's creating the form. It's taking nothingness and turning it into a particular form according to the frequency and the material being used and whatever. So this is a system that is actually a safe form of Kundalini activation. And I hate to do a biology 101 thing, but if you don't know what a strand of DNA looks like, that's it there, tucked away in the chromosome, which is tucked away in the nucleus of the cell, and it's very small. So there's a few basic sort of principles here that I want to run through, and I ask you to bear with me because the first half of this presentation, I've noticed that it's slightly drier than the second half, and I'm just going to hope that you're still awake for the second half. It's hopefully not too boring. I think it's interesting, but what I've realized from experience is not everyone wants the science or the nitty-gritty or the details. It's like people just sort of switch off. But what I've done is tried to condense that down into as few slides as possible, and hopefully we'll all still be awake in 5 minutes. So in 84, this paradigm of metagenetics, the Era 3 medical paradigm, started to really evolve and take shape because Dr. Peter Garriow discovered this DNA phantom effect. So basically, long story short, what happened was there was an isolated sample of DNA. It was in a contained enclosure. They hit it with particles of light, and what happened was the light actually started to spiral around the DNA. So it harnessed it was like it magnetized the DNA to it. And this was totally unexpected. It was a completely new discovery. That blew their minds, but when they took the actual physical DNA sample out, what happened was the light kept spiraling. So it was like there was a magnetic imprint in the fabric of space that stayed there, and that was what they called the DNA phantom. So that was, again, just a whole other level of groundbreaking discovery. So what it does, it entrains the fabric of space. I refer to it as the ether, the etheric medium in my book. It's a hyperspatial medium. It has fluid-like properties. If you think of space as being fluid-like, it helps to understand certain things. And we're kind of like fish living in a fishbowl. The water is like the fabric of space, and you can create vortices and all sorts of weird things to create different effects. So it's referred to in a lot of literature as a torsion field or a scalar field, like a so-called non-directional field, like a standing wave structure. It's probably not the best language, as Dan Winter would tell you, but we're not going to worry too much about semantics. So just think of it as a vortex, an implosive vortex. And that's got a lot to do with the idea of DNA as an antenna for consciousness, for electromagnetic phenomena and for consciousness as well, from these experiments, and they were replicated as well. So essentially, one of the amazing things is we have with our DNA this tiny, submicroscopic structure in every cell of our bodies. We have this pathway between us, our minds, and the fabric of space. Now, the fabric of space is infinite, but it's infinitely integrated. Everything's interconnected, regardless of distance. So if you can if you can create the right conditions, and your mind can do this at will, you can send information from one point to another point anywhere in the universe. It doesn't matter how far away, and it arrives instantly. It doesn't actually have to physically traverse the distance. So it's kind of like a wormhole thing. So this, believe it or not, is kind of related to healing. This modality is healing on one level, but it actually is evolutionary, which is my main interest in it. That's why I bothered to talk about it, is because it's not just like, I've got a bad back and can you fix me? It's like, well, it will have some effect on that, but how about we transform your whole state of being instead? That's why I like this stuff. So the basic principles to understand for remote healing, because I only ever do these activations remotely for people generally, is basically non-coding DNA, the so-called junk DNA, is largely involved with our morphic fields. It's our consciousness antenna. It's tapping us into the ether, the fabric of space, this watery, fluid-like, weird hypermedium that we're all standing in. Is our DNA is like the key in there, the wormhole. Distance has absolutely no meaning in terms of era 3 metagenetics. It's completely irrelevant. So we're referring to torsion or gravity waves as being able to transmit information instantaneously, effectively. I mean, they've measured gravity waves as traveling literally billions of times faster than the speed of light. So again, the idea that the speed of light is any kind of speed limit in the universe is wrong. And there are plenty of researchers on the frontier who will tell you that. So the key here, the bottom point, if you notice down the bottom there with intentionality has to be most effectively harnessed, it has to be accompanied by heart coherence. As I cringe to say it, because the word love has been ruined in so many ways by the New Age movement, but really that's what we're getting at, is if you can put yourself into a coherent heart space, in other words, an essentially loving heart space, your intentions are amplified multiple times over. It's not just a matter of mind over matter. It's actually your state of beingness governed by the most powerful electromagnetic vortex in your body. That's the key. So again, era 3 medicine and metagenetics. Dr. Glenn Ryde did some pretty amazing experimental research with this stuff. He found that DNA was actually compressed by the so-called negative emotions, and it was actually expanded and unwound by the positive emotions. So love and whatever unwinds and opens it up, and it has to be unwound so that the RNA codes can actually get in there and do the healing and recoding. So if you're in a perpetual state of anger or frustration, fear, whatever, you're contracted, your DNA strands are contracted, and you're not going to be able to actually heal properly. Your faculties will be shut down, your immune system will be compromised, and so on and so forth. So his work was really interesting. It was quite groundbreaking. He did some awesome work with the Heart Math Institute. And what they actually found was, sorry, I'm just going to skip through here just to see where I'm at. Okay, so I'll go here. So in his experiments, they were looking at isolated DNA samples in test tubes or what have you. People would target these samples of DNAs from, say, a distance of several feet away and try to intentionally wind or unwind them. And what he found was that the people who could get themselves into a coherent heart space were actually the ones who were able to affect the physical change to the DNA molecules, which is really, again, which proves the point that DNA is an antenna for consciousness. And it also is illustrating this point about how much more effective we are at creating change internally and also externally when we're coming from a place of love. So, and I also found it interesting that the samples of DNA they were using in these experiments didn't belong to the people who were working with their intention. It was not actually one of their biological samples. So I think that given that your DNA is peculiar and particular to you, if they were to use their own DNA sample, the effect would probably be magnified quite significantly because their DNA is an antenna that's tuned to them personally. So again, the key here was simply feeling love-based emotions wasn't enough. The intention also had to be there, and vice versa. The intention's good, but unless it's coupled with the love factor, then it's not going to be anywhere near as powerful. So I'll just come back here. So Sol says in Conscious Healing, only the love-based emotions stimulate DNA to decompress so that the messenger RNA can access the codes for healing. Hatred and depression and so on cause DNA to close down on itself, limiting the access to the information. So he mentions the word evolution there because his perspective and my perspective, where we're coming from, is not just, hey, we're broken down and bust and falling apart and we want to heal. We're talking about going next level altogether and becoming something different. Actually, something that we were supposed to be and have been diverted away from. That's just, again, a diagram of what the DNA unwinding looks like. So on the right-hand side, you have the mother strand, and it has to be unwound so that all the other enzymes and what have you can get in there and do their thing, do the recoding. Okay, so just quickly with the junk DNA concept, in 2003 there was a nearly decade-long research project that actually featured massive amounts of scientists in laboratories around the world. In September 2012 they announced that after much painstaking work, some 80% of the human genome actually was performing a particular function. So while we acknowledge that, say, as little as 1% of the DNA is actually being used to physically build the body, the actual proteins for your physical structure, and they used to think, oh, well, the rest of it's just junk, we don't know what it's doing. Well, they've actually found that about 80% of it or more is doing something in particular. It may not be building the physical body, but it's doing something. It is working. It's not junk. So yeah, again, 95 to 99% of the text is so-called non-coding. This is where we're coming from is morphic field antenna. It's your consciousness antenna to a large extent. Humans, as it happens, have more junk DNA than any other species that's been identified by a long, long way. So if you think about that, it seems to me that it might actually reflect the long-term evolution of consciousness through the human vehicle. So if you look at how radically different our conscious awareness is to, and I'm not saying better, in some ways it's horrifically mutated, but in general our sophistication is there to suggest that maybe that junk DNA, so-called, is actually related to the evolution of the mind, and that it wouldn't be there in such massive amounts had it not been crucial to evolving our consciousness, particularly at the rational mental level, which is where we've been for some time. Okay, so about 50% of the junk, the so-called junk, is made up of mobile elements, so transposons and retrotransposons. They can move around the genome and recode certain codons. That's what we're talking about here with this sound-based healing modality to a large extent, I think, is the jumping DNA that moves around. We can use our intention, our heart space to actually trigger that, to get it to do the things that it should be doing. And, a lot of us are shut down and closed down, and we've been so heavily tinkered with. It's not simply a matter of blaming. It's not a matter of blaming, but just simply to observe the fact that something doesn't seem quite right here, and we can actually do something about it. So satellite DNA is another component of our non-coding DNA. The main point there that William Brown, who's a microbiologist, makes is that he thinks it has to do with expanding the information carrying capacity of the DNA molecule, because the satellite DNA can replicate itself, basically. It can multiply itself. So they're just very, very short little segments of like CAG, CAG, CAG might just be repeated 4 or 5 times in the strand, but it can multiply that fragment out again and again. Again, if it's a consciousness antenna, then you can increase the antenna's capacity to receive consciousness. And vice versa, if you contract the antenna and mess with it, then you can reduce its consciousness carrying capacity. So de novo genes are another thing that are recently on the radar as well. They're actually built by junk DNA. Not a lot seems to be known about them. And there are also these domains of unknown function that have been talked about recently as well. My view is that I tend towards the view that anything that's being discovered now in these areas of the junk DNA portion of the genome and what have you, actually is most likely going to be related to consciousness in particular and human potential, and our ability to utilize consciousness to tap into our human potential. Because at the moment you can see there's this sort of renaissance of consciousness happening on the planet, and I from a big picture sort of symbolic point of view, that's how I kind of look at this stuff now in the direction it's going. So the premise here is that these non-coding stretches of DNA are actually probably really important for evolution. Holly Dunsworth gives us this quote. She says, "Long stretches of non-coding DNA give us a playground for evolution. It could be a huge selective advantage to have all that raw material available to mutate and either modify existing traits and behaviors or express altogether new ones." So this is exactly what we're looking at doing for those of us who want to access our higher potential. And this particular system is the regenetics method system. The ultimate lazy man's way of activating Kundalini and multidimensional DNA strands. I'm going to talk about the multidimensional aspect in a moment. So again, the purpose, I've already run through the basic premise of it. Dr. Len Horowitz is a huge proponent of the Solfeggio scales, the Solfeggio tuning forks. His view is that, in theory, phase locking your body to the 528 hertz frequency in particular sends the most powerful healing energy in the universe to your DNA's amino acid sequence. So my experience with using that 528 hertz frequency is that he's probably on the right track. It has a very powerful effect, and I found it to be a very potent intervention when I used it on myself for the first time as well. And he talks also about this magical 144 number, the 144,000. A few of you have seen that floating around. In the dedication to their book, Horowitz and Puleo state that they're dedicating it to those who will sing, the 144,000, those who will sing these magical tones in unison, returning the earth and God's people to everlasting harmony. So they think that it's going to take 144,000 people to utilize the Solfeggio tones. They don't really... Horowitz has his own system. He has the perfect circle of sound. We recently were put in contact. We recently met up with 2 individuals who, I guess you could say, might be part of our soul group, if you take the Michael Newton sort of perspective on it. And they actually are also saying that we need 144,000 people to get this planetary ascension done and dusted. And they express that it might actually have a 2-year window to do it as well. So that's very recent information for me, coming to us from an insider who used to be a part of the system. I don't want to go into too much of their personal details, but yeah, very highly activated, switched on people who know what's going on. So again, I'm just working with this as a possibility that we may need 144,000 people to actually activate themselves in order to hold and stabilize the energies in the transformational process that the planet itself is going through, not just humanity. I'm going to walk you through 4 of the actual activations and what they're about. We were talking about the after-death experiences and this sort of stuff, where the soul goes when you die and what have you, and this is going to tie into that sort of stuff as well. So activation 1 only uses 528 hertz. It's targeting the physical and the etheric bodies. The etheric body is considered by occultists to be a physical body in itself anyway. This timeline here, interestingly, this is just a download. You have to understand this system wasn't concocted out of the rational mind. It was essentially a download after 10 years of searching by Sol. He had his life destroyed by 2 vaccines in particular, and he spent 10 years searching for a solution. He tried every mainstream intervention, he tried every alternative intervention, and what happened in the end, through a series of serendipitous sort of synchronicities and what have you, he co-developed and co-downloaded the sound and light codes that I'll show you in a minute, and this system. And that, utilising this system and those codes, he actually reversed the vaccine damage completely. And not only that, he found that he actually had enhanced himself to beyond where he was before he was damaged. So again, he's operating from this perspective of evolving yourself, not just healing what's physically broken. So it's just interesting that, as it turned out, if you look up there at the very top, you have basically 3 9-month blocks. So it's a 27-month timeline if you do it as quickly as possible. And 9 months is obviously the period of gestation for a human fetus. I'm not sure why it turned out like that, but it did. And it's kind of interesting that it takes us 9 months to build a baby and have a baby, and it takes 3 lots of 9 to rebirth yourself as it happens, if I can put it like that. So this is, on the right, you'll see a picture of the etheric body. That's from Barbara Brennan's book, Hands of Light. She has probably the best diagrams of this stuff that I've been able to find. And the basic idea here in the regenetics method is that all illness arises from bioenergetic distortions or disharmonies held in the bioenergy blueprint. So if there's distortions in that etheric template, which is the template for building the physical body, then you're going to have problems at the physical level sooner or later. That's the focus of this first activation with the single 528 Hertz tuning fork. Interestingly, Barbara Brennan herself is a sound healer. She uses her voice as well. When I use the tuning forks, I'm using my voice at the same time to tone one note out loud and a different vowel silently in my head. She works with her own system, and she's found that by toning the right sound into a chakra that's deformed, it will take the shape that it's meant to have. So if you think back to like the cymatics thing with sound affecting physical particles, vibration. If you use the analogy of the particles being light particles, like in your auric field or what have you, then it's like you are using that cymatic effect to restructure the chakra vortex. So she's confirmed it independently as a clairvoyant, a very talented clairvoyant. She can actually see what's going on, and she makes the observation that it will stand up and spin correctly if she gets the right note, and that it will also shortly thereafter correct the second level, which is the emotional level of the field, once she's corrected the first. So there's a flow-on effect there because we're integrated, where we have that sort of two-way flow of information between one field to the next, from the body into the fields. The second activation actually targets the mental body. Most people would say that the mental body should follow the emotional body or the astral body, but the way the system came through Sol and his partner, it was simply this was the order it was done in, and so that's if you like the mental body. Again, highly structured, like the etheric body, looks a lot like it, and there is that alternating structure pattern in these bodies. So you have one that's highly structured, and then you'll have another that's more fluid-like, then you have a highly structured crystalline one, fluid-like, highly structured, and so on and so forth. For some reason they just alternate that way. These are the templates for this is the template for your mind, if you like, the rational mind. Yes, that's I don't know. It just kind of interests me, the idea that we can, from a rationalist point of view, the only thing that exists is the physical body and the brain, and your mind is in your brain, and that's it. But it's like, well, your mind, this is your mind. It's actually all around your body, and it's kind of hilarious to think that we're so deluded that the thing doing the thinking here is invisible to us, and it's deluding us into thinking the thing doing the thinking is actually locked away in the cranium. So, just a point of interest there. The third activation targets the emotional body. And Brennan's images are quite interesting. Most people don't I guess, pick up on this, but the emotional body on the left there is like a lower dimensional analog to the astral body, which is on the right. So you can see they look really similar, and maybe that has something to do with why so many people don't note two different bodies like this. Maybe they can't separate them or distinguish them. I'm not sure, but that's where we're targeting the emotional level. And I can tell you, if you've got emotional problems buried away in your psyche, if you're in your auric field, the way I look at this system and what it does to people is, it's like, you know, those the snow globes, you know, where you got the fluid in there and you have the little snowflakes, and then you pick it up and you shake it, and the snow goes everywhere. That's kind of what the sound is doing in my mind. It's like it's picking up your psyche, your auric field, and shaking it. So you start bringing things to the surface that may not have been at the surface level for quite some time. So you can actually do something with it and heal it. And that's what's happening at the mental level as well. But I find if you've got one of those monkey minds, it's probably, for example, I did the previous activation, this one, articulation, on my ex a while back, and she had a really busy mind, like could not stop thinking, totally scattered thoughts, circular thinking, round and round and round, couldn't shut it off. As soon as I did that, she experienced placid inner peace, calm, for probably the first time in years and years. And it blew her away, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, because, again, I was doing this she was in Western Australia, I was sitting in Sydney, so it's nice to see the non-local effects being powerfully registered. So the prefrontal cortex is also physiologically, the target of that previous activation, the elucidation. This is like building the groundwork for experiencing this so-called God consciousness. You know, we see these yogi masters and what have you talk about this amazing elevated state of being where they're just in constant state of bliss and joy and what have you. And the idea here is that that's actually based in the prefrontal cortex. That's that's like a physical basis for these kinds of emotions. So what Sol's saying is that actually, it's corresponding to this activation in particular, and you're laying a groundwork for the next activation, which is taking you to the level of conscious personal mastery, at least in principle. So I've found, having been through this system, that I'm definitely not the same person who started out pre-activation, if you like. It's really interesting to be able to observe the subtle effects. I mean, I went through the physical activation, I did that myself, and I had immediate buzzing in my shoulders, in the rotator cuffs, because they'd been giving me problems for a long time. And I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing, and I walked outside and I leant against the letterbox, which is a big brick thing, and I just watched some ants running in and out of a little anthill, and my mind kind of melded with them, and for just a couple of seconds I melded with the ants as they were running around their little anthill on the ground. I thought, oh wow, this is pretty cool. So it's kind of like that. If you know, most people have this they're like this skin encapsulated ego, to borrow someone else's phrase, and they feel really disconnected from everything. And most of us spend our lives feeling disconnected from everything, especially our deeper levels of self. And so what I found is, from that little moment with the ants, over the 27-month timeline that I went through, you actually develop quite a subtle sense of interconnectedness that accompanies you basically all the time. So it's quite a nice sort of transformative process to go through, and you don't feel like you're just this weird lump of meat, disconnected and isolated. And what are you doing here? It's like, I mean, I can feel you guys in the room here with me, and it's maybe there are circumstances where you don't want to feel everyone in the room with you, but it is, in general, a very nice thing to be able to experience that alteration of conscious awareness. Yep. Yeah, do you want to have a break now?
Could we take a break now?
Yeah, please. All right, thanks, guys. In the actual activation, which is cool. So what I'm going to do is skip sections, and we're going to go into some of the more esoteric and interesting stuff, and we're going to make space for the activation. I'm not sure how far in we should try doing that exactly. You know, it'll need a half hour.
Yeah.
So I could.
Do you want to do that at the end?
It might be a nice way to finish, as long as we don't get someone running in and tipping us out of our seats.
Well,
Yeah.
I can go and find out. How about that?
Oh, that would be amazing.
And see if we can stay an extra 15.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
That way it should.
Okay. Thank you, Mariana. Okay, so what I was doing was running through the theory, if you like, behind the activations, and I'm at the final one now. So we've gone from the emotional body. Now we're hitting the so-called causal body, the spiritual body. Michael Newton, his research was mentioned earlier. I've read his books and all that material, and he comments in one of them something along the lines of, I've done all these regressions, and at no point has anyone ever sort of talked about this causal realm or plane or whatever. And I sort of realised that all of his work, all of those regressions are what you would call causal plane regressions. That's where those people are finding themselves. That's the plane they're on, if you like. That's where you're going to plan and orchestrate and envision your next incarnation. So that's his work there, as far as I'm concerned, because it's hard to find good information on the so-called causal plane. If you interpret it through that lens, it could be actually really useful. I'm going to talk about that heaps in TGI2 anyway. I'm going to do all the hard slog for you. So the 9-month period I was talking about, the gestation period for the activations, is one of those ones where, as you go through it, you start noticing synchronicities start piling up, and they get more and more intense and more frequent. And case in point was, I had Transcension, the final activation, done on June 1st, 2013. And exactly 9 months later, but basically to the day, we actually created Global Freedom Movement. And I didn't actually realise the timing of it until after the fact, and I went and looked at my sort of records and went, oh my God, it was exactly 9 months later that we created this thing. So, I mean, it was like the all-time personal synchronicity. It blew my mind that 9 months later, the gestational period for these activations was what gave birth, the final gestation gave birth to Global Freedom Movement. So I knew, by looking at it in hindsight, I was like, okay, well, this is obviously, this is my baby, if you like. And Amy's too. Yeah. We have joint custody. So that's the timeline. It's a minimum 27-month thing because you need time to integrate the changes. This is what the sound and light code looks like for potentiation. I use that for distance potentiation, but it's effective for in-person as well. It doesn't actually matter. So that's what it looks like. If you want me to, very briefly, I can tell you that the top line there, every line you see that's in capital letters is a line that has to be toned out loud. So I'm chanting this continuously with no breaks in between the vowels. And then the line in the lowercase letters just below it is actually the light code, which I'm doing silently in my mind. So it's one of those ones where you really need to focus. And I get people, occasionally come to me saying, it's all a bit much, can you do it for me? Multitasking isn't traditionally my strong point, but it seems to work. So interestingly, to return briefly to the dry scientific material that everyone loves so much, there's been a lot of talk about the linguistic aspects of DNA and the way that it's got this sort of linguistic structure to it, and they're saying that the DNA base pairs form fractal structures that are related to human speech patterns, and the junk DNA follows grammar and usage rules almost identical to human language. Satellite DNA segments can also form palindromes. So palindrome's a word that's spelt the same front ways and back ways. Oh, there's a little grammatical error there. The vowel sounds that we're using, A, E, I, O, U, if you tone this one after the other continuously, it actually starts to sound like the old name of God, so to speak, Yahweh. A, I, O, U. If you just keep chanting that, I, O, I, O, I, it starts to morph into Yahweh, Yahweh. Interesting little coinky-dink that, I think. Alpha numerically, if you use the Pythagorean skein of which is to reduce numbers by adding them and then to reduce them down into a single-digit number. A is the first letter of the alphabet, obviously, so number 1. If you add them up, A, E, I, O, U, numerically, you actually can reduce them down to the number 6, and that's the mi tone, 5 to 8 hertz, 6. It's also the atomic mass number of oxygen. And Greg Braden's book, The God Code, is where I'm getting some of this information from. So he's telling us, he explains that YHV, the old Hebrew name for God, actually means God or eternal. YHV is Y, which has the value of 1, the H has the value of 5, and the V has the value of 6. So if you add that up, it equals 12, and if you reduce it down to a single-digit number, 1 plus 2 equals 3. That's the atomic mass of carbon. So Gimel, which forms the YHV, if you add Gimel, which is the earth element, carbon, you get YHVG, which means God eternal within the body. Gimel represents the body, earth, the carbon-based body. So it's an interesting little revelation that Greg Braden brought us with the God Code book. It was quite amazing to me, especially doing this kind of work. So God eternal within the body also reduces to a 6 when you add the numbers up. AEIOU reduces to a 6, and 528 reduces to a 6. Interestingly, the carbon atom structure is 666. It's 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, and 6 protons. So there's your devil. It's just matter, really. The adversary. Satan is the adversary, and it's got nothing to do with an evil entity whatsoever. And the Torah tells us, "You shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your God." And here are some interesting little sort of alphanumerical clues as to why this is such a revered thing. The number 6, as we're about to see, relates to the concept of the 5 to 8 hertz frequency and the concept of DNA repair and regeneration. So to tie that together, all those numbers and the YHVG, God eternal within the body, it's actually a reference to the signature of God, which is the phi spiral, the golden mean, the golden ratio. That's actually what defines fractality. I'm going to skip through some of that stuff because I know some people don't necessarily want to spend time on it. But it's actually, that's, if you like, the signature of God is phi. It's that infinite ability to infinitely nest, or that infinite recursiveness. It's what governs the DNA structure. Phi, the golden ratio, governs our DNA structure. So when you put it in context of all this stuff, this God eternal within the body thing becomes the phi ratio inside the DNA strand inside the body. So the eternal is actually embodied physically now in the human being. Yeah, mate?
Could you just go back to that previous slide, please?
Yep.
Coming down 5 to 8, you've got 5 plus 2 plus 8, which equals 15. Just wondering where the 6 comes from.
1 plus 5 is 6.
Oh, okay.
Yep. You just got to reduce it down to a single digit. It's very, very simple. I'm not a math whiz and I'm not interested in math. Yep.
Sorry, I was just wondering, why does the devil one equal completion?
Oh, well, the number 9 has been associated with that, the completion.
So could that be a positive thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, why have we turned it into this incredible negative?
Yeah.
In a way, from a really anthropocentric point of view, the human being, from a Christian sort of the traditional perspective, is the completion of God's creation. The apex, what's the word I'm looking for? The most amazing thing. Damn vocab. Anyway, yeah. So there's no reason to have such a negative connotation with it at all. But people like things to be scared of. So that's what I was getting at there, is tying it all together. You get this reference, this obscure reference to the phi spiral, golden ratio, in the body, in the DNA. So it's this implosive spiraling, so-called torsion energy of the etheric medium, which is built in, with its built-in golden ratio signature. That is actually God eternal in the body. So that's another element to the revelations that Greg Braden had in his book. I've just taken it a little bit further. Taking a step back into epigenetics, we're getting from the leading edge guys like Gariev there on the left that the genome has a capacity for quasi-consciousness, so that the DNA words produce and help in the recognition of semantically meaningful phrases. So our DNA is like a computer that's processing what we're saying and thinking, what we're verbalizing out loud and verbalizing internally. That's scientifically where we're at there. As I mentioned, we're working with the Solfeggio scale. It comes from a hymn to John the Baptist by a guy called Paulus Diaconus, 8th century historian. So the actual individual 6 notes of the Solfeggio scale there that I've got in my tuning forks there, they come from ut, quiont laxus, resonare fibris. So it's just the first syllable of each of these lines. I've only broken it up into 3 lines, but anyway, so it's ut, re, mi, fa, so, la. And obviously we are familiar with the modern sort of scale which says do, re, mi, fa, so, la, si, but that's a bastardization of the original, if you like, sacred 6-tone scale. And then Guido of Arezzo came along in the 11th century and developed the actual 6-note scale from those syllables there that you see that are underlined. The literal Latin translation is something along the lines of, in order that the slaves might resound the miracles and wonders of your creations with loosened vocal cords and wash the guilt from our polluted lip. So, it's a bit of a mouthful, but what the Clays did by studying various dictionaries and what have you, they tried to put together a more meaningful sort of take on it, and what they did with their enlarged, bigger picture translation of it was to translate it into the divine mind needs an unconfined and freely moving relationship with us that will resonate our speech or the very fibre of our being to produce a miracle of communication which will solve and dissolve and release the restrictions of our speech. That's from the Solfa Sound Training Manual. So that's kind of what this weird, obscure Latin phraseology is getting at. It's one line of interpretation. These are the 6 notes that we use in these activations. I've bolded me 528 because it's the only one that I use for the DNA potentiation, the very first one. And Dr. Lee Lorenzen has been talking to Len Horowitz, saying that they are using this frequency to heal DNA and to work with DNA, but that information isn't actually reaching the public domain. So I haven't been able to find any, but apparently they're quietly using this knowledge tucked away in obscure scientific corridors. And it's closely guarded by the Catholic Church. I mean, it seems to have originated there, but they don't want to talk about it too much. Dr. Joe Polio tried to chase this information down, and he co-wrote the book Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse with Len Horowitz. And he was trying to chase down this information as to what these weird Latin phrases meant. And he called the Monsignor of I think it was a university in Spokane or something in the US, and he was having a friendly enough little chat. But when he finally got down to the business of asking him, can you tell me what ut quiont laxus means, the guy suddenly got a little bit less friendly and said, none of your business, and hung up on him. So they're not openly offering this information to us plebeians. That's just an image produced by the 528 hertz tone on its own, this so-called cymoglyph by John Stuart Reid. And it's just interesting that it divides up into this weird 36-pointed geometry. It's kind of quite an amazing sort of symbol of balance and 36 points in the circle, 10 degrees each. It's quite an interesting symbol of balance, I think. 528 hertz is something that people seem to recognize on a subconscious level, and when they hear it, something clicks, and they go, "Oh yeah, I like that." But they don't really know why. It's like our cells are missing this frequency, and you know we know that like the universe and the sun and the moon and our solar system is tuned to 432, but if you want to work transformationally, I think that 528 hertz and the Solfeggio is really the way to go. I don't think that people are getting the same effects out of using 432. I think it's a very chilled out mellow tone, but I'm not interested in using it for accelerated evolution and becoming something else, something more, returning to the human blueprint, if you like. Supposedly, I haven't been able to follow this up successfully, but supposedly these are some of the images produced by these Solfeggio tones. These were using the I think the Emoto, sort of Masaru Emoto's method for melting the ice particles and photographing them. I'm not going to say it's definitely legit, but that's what someone has offered up. This is where it really gets more interesting to me, because recent information that's come to me and Amy has added a whole other level to this. And Sol's system, he works with three electromagnetic groups that have, you'll see, like if I email you following an activation, I'll be sending you a chart for what you are. And people fall into one of these three categories. There's these three, like if you like, DNA groups. And recently, from talking to our insider friends, we've found that, or we've been told that there's three essential blueprints for DNA on the planet right now. You have the 12-strand, and when I'm talking about these strands, they're energetic, multidimensional strands. They're not physical strands in your body. We have 2 physical strands, obviously, but the rest is multidimensional. So there's a 12-stranded template, which is the so-called human angelic template. That would be most people on the planet who belong to that template. So if you look around, we all see something's drastically wrong. So something has gone wrong. We've deviated from our blueprint, if you like, our angelic nature or state, and we've forgotten who and what we are. Then you have these indigo groups, these indigo templates. So there's apparently indigo 2 and indigo 1. Indigo 2 has a 24 to 36 strand template, and indigo 1 has a 36 to 48 strand template. We were told, Amy and I were told, that we belong to the indigo 1 48 strand template. Me personally, I was told that in their system of understanding that I'm a so-called technician, so indigo 1 technician. So to me that takes on an interesting meaning in terms of this DNA work, because I'm like, oh, well, I kind of am a technician. I'm actually working with people to restore them to their genetic blueprint, their energetic blueprint that has been bastardized, and we're so messed up here, and we finally have some tools to actually do something about it. So for me it has a really interesting personal meaning. And I know I had someone come up to me while we were having a break and say, tell us more about yourself or experiences or whatever. Feel free, if you have a particular question, to jump in, because I don't know what you want to hear unless you tell me. And if I start talking about myself, I might not stop. So, 528. Incidentally, if you look at the light, the visible spectrum, it actually falls like pretty much smack bang in the midsection here. So we're dealing with the green ray. The green ray being the heart vortex, the heart chakra. And obviously we're at a point where we really need a lot more people to really fire up the compassion factor and really access their hearts. We have a real dearth of compassion on the planet at the moment. So this is one of the interesting things I think about this work is that when you activate Kundalini and these multi-dimensional strands of DNA, you get the energy flowing up to these higher centers, and you actually do change the nature of an individual's being. A fully activated human being will be much more compassionate. Any fully activated human will basically be a vegetarian purely on the basis of I don't want to eat, I don't want to kill something in order to eat. At a cellular level, there's a biological mechanism for sound and light and energy reception. It's called cilia. They're little antenna-like structures. They're like cells. They sit on the cell membrane. Bruce Lipton talks about it in his book. He's just saying that receptor antennas read vibrational energy like sound and light and radio frequencies. And Barbara Marciniak, in her book Earth, now she's a channeler who supposedly channels the Pleiadians, who I've been multiply associated with by many different people. She's saying that toning is a key to releasing stored knowledge. It unlocks a doorway and allows information into your body. So in a subtle way, it changes your perceptions, and it does. Like after my potentiation, I walked outside and I had a unity experience with a bunch of ants. So that was definitely an altered state of perception. That's cilia. That's a whole bunch of them on cell membranes. That's a close-up in the top right there. You've got a single cilia. That's what an individual one looks like. And this down here is a top-down cross-sectional diagram of one. Okay, so I've been talking a little bit about DNA and the phi ratio. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, other than to show you the phi ratio, 0.618, 0.32. That is the embodiment at a microbiological level of the golden ratio. That's God eternal within the body in every one of your cells. So the DNA strand is 34 angstroms long, and 21 wide. Again, that's approximating the 0.618 golden ratio. The Fibonacci sequence is the way nature, deals with the irrational number of the golden ratio, because the golden ratio doesn't have an end point. It's not a whole number or anything. It's not, if you like, it's not real. So the Fibonacci sequence is the way that nature approximates it. And the more the Fibonacci sequence goes along, the closer and closer and closer it gets to actually getting bang on the golden ratio. I just found some interesting little internal relationships with the Solfeggio notes 396 and 639. I found when I divided 396 by 639, I got 0.619, very, very close to the golden ratio. And when I reversed the operation, divided 639 by 396, I got 1.613, which again is very, very close to the golden ratio. I did the same thing with 528 and 852, and again, I got not only the same, I got the same numbers, which I thought was interesting. When I divided 396 by 528, I got a 0.75. When I divided 396 by 852, I got 0.464. So those numbers didn't look very interesting, but then I thought, well, what if I divide them by each other? And so I divided 0.464 by 0.75, and I got the golden ratio again. So it's just interesting for me to know these correlations within this scale that we're working with here. There's so many rabbit holes and things you could go down, and I'd love to spend more time on that personally when I get a chance. This is some fractal humour for you. A fractal equation walks into a bar, inside 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 a bar. You get the idea. That's one of the few jokes I've made up. Okay, so I've been talking about the blueprint, the body's blueprint. We have these energetic blueprints that we've deviated from, largely, I would say, probably partly through trauma, like ancestral trauma that gets passed down the line, but also through tinkering, draconian interference and what have you with our templates. And I forgot to mention that most people in the room, most people on the planet will be angelic 12-strand human templates. The indigos, I believe, given the way that I'm starting to put things together in my head, I believe the indigos, especially indigo ones, are not, if you like, the normal, or they weren't maybe intended to be the normal template. They're actually there to serve an intervention purpose, to actually incarnate, to help the angelic 12-strand templates get back to the template and if you like, rebirth, and I don't like connotations associated with that, but to return to the blueprint that we were supposed to be operating according to. So hence, when I get told I'm a technician, I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm helping 12-strand angelic humans activate the 12 strands of multidimensional DNA. These are the structure of the auric field is essentially this magnetic vortex here. If you look behind the light, like most clairvoyants see the light aspects of the aura, you'll get the magnetic field, the fractal implosive vortex. There's a top vortex and there's a bottom vortex. It's not very clear on the right-hand side, but I had a friend who actually sees these. I've got two friends who actually see these and have verified each other's observations, basically. So the top one, vortex in, the bottom one, vortex out, according to my friend Loretta. So we are these vortexes, we are these torsion fields. That's a short video, we don't need to watch it. So, very interesting material, which I'm going to skip to now, which is really what happens. There's two things I want to show you. What happens with electrophysiological scans using this device. These are scans of people who've had, one person who hasn't had any activations done, and then two different people who have had activations done in it. It's not what you would call a scientific study. I would love to have the resources to do proper longitudinal studies on this, but it's still quite interesting. So this device takes electrical feedback into computer software, and it gives you like a model of the auric field. That's what it looks like hooked up to someone. Okay, so this was a scan done of someone who had no potentiation, no DNA activations done with this method at all. You can see there's 4 dark patches there in their field, and it looks a bit sickly and weak. Thank you, by the way, to Frank Nagy for supplying me with these and letting me use them. This is actually Frank's wife. This was 2 days after her second activation, so 7 months after her first one. You can see there's a big difference between that and that. Again, I don't know what she looked like before her potentiation because he didn't have any scans for that. But interesting, because there's a pattern that develops here. This is Frank himself now, so this is the third person. 1 day after elucidation. Elucidation's the third activation. So he's at least 9 months after the potentiation activation. And you can see something interesting starts to happen with the electrical activity in the body here. Now he's got this sort of marshmallow man outline around him. 2.5 months later, after elucidation, you can see there's a faint outline. It's probably not very clear to you guys, but there's a faint outline now. It's like the previous one, you get this expansion of the field. Now, in the next one, it starts to stretch, and it actually starts looking more human again. It's a more human outline. Again, now you've got him 3 weeks after the final activation, which is transcension, and you've got that expansion out again, this weird sort of marshmallow man look, and then halfway through transcension, he's stretching out again and starting to look more human. You've got that sort of if you like, fractal structure, the nestedness taking shape there. So this is someone who had no activations done, and we go through Frank's wife after her second one, and we have Frank after his third, second one after his third, 3 weeks after the fourth, halfway through transcension. So he would have been about 4.5 months away from completing the whole timeline at that point. Now, this is what I didn't get to talk about at the last UFO group meeting, so I'm going to do it this time. This is about the structure, this weird energetic structure or defect that it seems that everyone has. And it's referred to in the soul system as the fragmentary body. It's basically around the just below the navel in the sexual chakra area, and it's a defect that stops the energy operating in your system as it's supposed to. It's a defect that stops it rising up and being utilised properly by the higher energy centres. So, in a manner of speaking, people who are running like this, who are operating like this, which is most of the population, are operating literally in a lower state of consciousness. They're stuck in survival mode. They're insecure. They're territorial. Whatever, it's about. They've just got no idea who and what they are because they're cut off from their higher awareness. They're cut off from their higher energy centres. Even people who are spiritually relatively aware, they still benefit from this activation process because you can actually, through this methodology, you can embody what you actually know. And it's not just like a knowingness, but you actually start to embody it and live it. So this is an interesting phenomenon. It creates weird effects, not weird, but effects that you see all around you in the world. So it's a consciousness vacuum. It limits our consciousness. It blocks our core awareness of self. It gives us core identity issues, or at least it certainly contributes to distortions in that area. It blocks higher awareness because it sucks the energy and information, or at least holds it in that lower area. You get people doing this behaviour of like overworking themselves and just endlessly striving and sacrificing themselves, and they don't know when to stop. And that's partly because this slavery yoke or fragmentary body is what feeds this. It feeds this behaviour. So people sell themselves out, or they sell themselves short. They don't know when to stop. They have problems setting up boundaries and saying no, all this sort of stuff. So overall, in general, you get this like lack of personal power. And these areas relate to archetypal wounds as well, which are connected physiologically to the gut area. The gut is connected to core identity. So we're inheriting, physiologically and energetically, we're inheriting core identity issues from generations and generations past as well. Just a little comic. That's just illustrating the fact that the gut and the brain are actually communicating to each other all the time, or at least they're supposed to be. And if you can get your gut and your brain and your heart on the same page, then you're a much more integrated functional individual. So what happens here with this energy defect in the fragmentary body is it's affecting your gut-brain prime functions, which is like mobilization, and you get distortions around self-preservation and core identity. And if you can't utilize the primary functions of the gut-brain, the highest expression of the gut, which is courage, can't manifest. So I've seen with one person in particular, after just doing the first activation, potentiation, 5 months down the track, according to this model, it seals the vortex here and corrects that dysfunction. So I've seen in one person in particular, who I know quite well, the way that they have just totally, radically transformed themselves in their life by taking on by embodying the courage that they had never shown before. And really, the primary thing, they hadn't had any real other interventions besides this one. This was a primary thing, and they really have that sense that, yeah, like, let's get on with the next activation because this is awesome. For honesty's sake, I'll say he also had a holographic kinetics session, and holographic kinetics is also, in terms of clearing yourself of attachments and dysfunctions in your system, a really, really valuable tool. This is what I'm driving at with this talk of all the physiological aspects in the gut brain and the heart brain and all this. If you integrate them all, then you end up as a much more powerful and effective and self-realized individual. And we want more compassion. Look, I'm going to skip this. I had some interesting things to say about the Matrix, but I want to do this activation for you guys because most of you seem to want to do it. Big picture stuff, as far as the geopolitical, economic, everyday living thing sort of goes, this is where we're choosing here consciously to embrace an entirely new way of living, a whole new paradigm of beingness. So on the left, I've got a negative sign. I'm saying, look, this is the ego persona, fear-based slavery model that we've all been inducted into, inculcated into, and this is the way the Matrix works, right? It wants us to stay in the lower state of consciousness. It feeds, whether it realizes or not, it feeds on our energetic dysfunction, it feeds on the fragmentary body, and we end up with this external control system, tyranny. We live under this thinly veiled tyranny, and we abdicate from our, if you like, sovereign throne. We don't rule ourselves. We don't rule our lives, and so that's where we want to move beyond here. And that's the whole point of why I don't talk in terms of healing. I talk about actual transformation and evolution, because what looks like, it's actually funny, when you say evolution, it looks like we're evolving, and collectively I think we are, but we're also, I think, recapitulating by returning to our blueprints, correcting the distortions in them. If we return to our original blueprint for beingness, if you want to talk about the angelic 12-strand blueprint, it will look like we're evolving, but really it's actually that we've devolved so far, and now if we can actually correct that, it looks like, wow, look how far we've come, but look how far we fell. So the paradigm here on the right with the plus sign is, this is where we want to be moving. It's into embracing actually living, which is not what the Matrix does. It's an anti-life machine, the Matrix. So we're embracing freedom and sovereignty and all this sort of stuff. Personal accountability and power is absolutely key here. And in this realm, we are the masters of ourselves and of our own destiny. We don't need to talk about that one. Interesting quip here from the High Court judge. I have come to the conclusion that the current legal and political system in use in Australia and its states and territories has no basis in law. So, yeah, we need to rule ourselves, because we have a de facto weird sort of fake criminal law system, just pretending that it's actual real law, but it's just colour of law. It's absolutely bogus. There's no authority in any of the courts or the police or anything. So it's, from a big picture perspective, must look pretty weird. And last month they were lobotomizing pumpkins. Now they're shoving bread up a turkey's ass. This planet has issues. Yeah, exactly. We have men in wigs. These guys taking themselves seriously. Look at there's absurdity all around us. We've normalized the most absurd, bizarre stuff. This is the natural law hierarchy we should be moving towards. It's with the Creator, which is fundamentally, if you like, us as creator, but then you have God, the creator, the infinite. Moving down, you have the creator creates. So whatever the creator creates, the creator has authority of or over. So we in the natural world as living men and women are at the top of the legal food chain, if you will, but we've had the wool pulled over our eyes here. In actual fact, we are the masters of anything that man has created. That's government, statutes, police, any corporation, all that stuff. We are actually the masters, not the slaves. But we've let this system take over and run amok. So sovereignty and spirituality are actually the same thing. That's what that Venn diagram is representing. Because if you cover all bases on spirituality, you'll be covering the exact same material in sovereignty. So it's basically self-determination, do no harm, self-accountability, freedom of thought, choice, action, all that stuff. And spirit creator is consciousness is king. It's like the common law. It boils down to do no harm. Do what you like, just don't harm anyone while you do it. And the fragmentary body, this destructive wave interference structure here in the lower chakra, it has been independently detected by my friend Eileen, who works with sound as well. She uses forks as well, but with her own healing modality. And she makes a comment that there appears to be some kind of energetic construct built into the fields that keep the vital life energy eddying in the bottom two chakras. Because of this insertion, we have this trapping of energy in the bottom two chakras. The result is either guilt and shame-driven overdoing. So we've all seen the supermum syndrome, people who can't turn off and say no and whatever and give themselves time out. Or you get frustrated non-doing, which is, again, all the same people. I mean, people alternate between those two patterns. It's like, either way, you're either a martyr or you're a victim. And you get stuck. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So dissolving that and sealing it, which is what happens after the 5-month mark, is actually quite important. That's just a visual representation of what we're talking about. So in this model, that topmost vortex there on the left actually descends down to the fragmentary body there, that disc, and actually in the process corrects what's going on. So the energy is actually, your Kundalini energy charge is actually free to circulate properly through your system. That's the idea anyway. We get this shift in mentality when you start, doing these things and really getting activated and switched on. Being subservient and a victim gets harder and harder to do. So I've just sort of illustrated with this little, picture of a police officer having pulled a guy over. I'm telling you, oh, hang on a minute, you don't tell me anything. Because if you remember who you are at law, you are a living man or woman within, a living spirit within a body. You're not a person, you're not a corporate construct, you're not a legal fiction. Unless you work for the company known as the police force, then their rules don't apply to you. Unless you decide that they do. In other words, consent. Consent is everything. That's the essence of that message, that exchange there. So we've got, what happens when we deal with this energy blockage here and we correct it is we make it harder for certain interdimensional friends of ours to feed off us. You'll see there on the right-hand side there's a depiction by Clive Burrows, I think that was in Children of the Matrix or something, where he's showing that this entity has latched onto, it looks like the solar plexus and the sacral chakra. And that's how they sort of feed off these lower energies. So if you actually allow your system to circulate the energy up higher through the higher centres, suddenly their food source is dwindling a little bit, and it's a little bit harder for them to hang on and feed off us. And that's it seems to be a bit of a predicament for these, if you like, astral reptilians or what have you. They are feeding off us and they don't want the food source to dry up because they're so disconnected from source that that's how they're surviving. So not a great place to be in, but we also don't have to put up with it. There are some depictions of what some of these guys look like. And Susan Ryde wrote The Body Snatchers. Her real name was Jenny Gosbell. She'd been having interactions with a physical male who was inhabited or whatever by a reptilian, and she had interactions with a reptilian, astral reptilian, if you want to call it that. She died under, accidentally, but what was probably pretty dodgy circumstances in the Bahamas, and Yes, that tends to happen to certain people who get involved with some of these guys. That's like a sauroid, if I get the right word, on the left. So it looks kind of like a pteranodon. That's one version of these reptilians. Again, not saying they are unpleasant or anything. That one came out of a book called Interviews with Space People, and it was quite a friendly one. Okawa is a Japanese guy who channels these things, and on the right there you have a white Draco, if you like. And I like to cross-correlate and get second opinions on things and what have you, and before I go sharing stuff like that. And I've had this stuff more or less verified by at least one other source who's encountered or seen these kinds of things. That's, if you like, the world structure, the nature of the power structure. We've kind of covered that already, but Etish was the name of the interdimensional reptoid that was, if you like, controlling Susan Ryde. And he told her once, we've got lots of planets on the boil, we spread our net where we want it, we destroyed our planet, war, and we don't want war anymore, but needs arise. We've got many planets on the boil, some less advanced than you, some about the same. So, yeah, again, you can really see, if you look around the world, the sort of the reptilian mentality of conquest and domination is really what we've embraced. So you've got to know your parasites. And I added Monsanto there because, according to our friend Alistair Lamore, Monsanto is a particular stronghold of the reptilians. They're really using Monsanto to do their best. As you can, if you've been following what Monsanto does, then you know what I'm talking about.
Many countries are kicking them out.
Yeah, exactly. Kicking them out for good reason. So evolution, this is where I'm driving at. We can probably, how are we doing for time?
Just about to check that. How are we going? We've got, is it 4:30?
4:30. So we've got about 40, half an hour or 40 minutes?
3/4 of an hour.
45 minutes? Okay, so I reckon I'm basically more or less at the end of what I wanted to show you, which gives us time, plenty of time enough. I will make a sort of few wrap-up observations. Obviously, this kind of talk, covers a lot of different strands, and you don't have time to pursue and elaborate on them all. So the nature of my next book will be tying all of this stuff together from a big picture point of view and really figuring out what the hell's going on. The mind at large thing, borrowing Michael Grotto's terminology there. If we look at NDEs, the near-death experiences, alien abduction experiences, there's a lot that differs on the surface, but in the long run, the outcome there is almost invariably the same. It is an evolutionary experience. It's a transformational experience. These people are completely different once they integrate what's going on, and that's more challenging with the abductees because it's generally interpreted through a lens of fear and confusion. But down the track, they go, oh, hang on a minute. I'm not that person I used to be. I'm open-minded. I care about the planet, the environment, and they have these realizations. They're not the same anymore. So it has a similar transformational outcome in the long run. The rising interest in psychedelics and all that sort of stuff, I think, is, again, that urge of the collective unconscious to make itself conscious and for people to become self-aware, so that we're seeing more and more interest and talk about that. The shamanic initiation experiences have a lot in common to do with alien abduction and I guess near-death experiences to a lesser extent. You get these wounded men figures on cave walls and stuff where they've got like spears or arrows in them and what have you, and the shamans go through, even modern shamans go through these weird, painful dismembering experiences, or they're getting probed and stabbed or what have you, pulled apart. And there's kind of these weird parallels in the alien abduction experiences with all the surgical themes and the probing and prodding and the implants and all that sort of stuff. The Kundalini activations through meditation, that's not on a more personalised level there. Again, we at this point in time, we have such a thirst for developing and for awakening, but not enough really good, reliable methodologies for doing it. And that's one of the reasons I spent so long banging on about the regenetics method, is because it actually is a reliable methodology and safe way to activate Kundalini, because it's gentle and it divides it up into a 27-month timeline instead of blowing your brain in 5 minutes. Which is what some unfortunate people have had happen to them when they do their own meditation and don't know what they're doing. So this is my bigger interest, which I haven't really indulged a lot, is the bigger picture here and what's happening with humanity and mankind, and that's why I was talking about the intervention from these star children or indigo beings or whatever you want to call them. We're getting these, if you like, alien or exopolitical dimensions sending in the troops into physical bodies to help wake humankind up before it really self-destructs. And I think it's working. It's definitely, I have a fundamentally optimistic outlook. I think that we will actually succeed in not destroying ourselves. And the planetary aspect of it is supposedly that the planet is moving into, did she say 4? I'm having a bit of a mental blank on that one, but it might be a transition from 3rd density to 4th density for Mother Earth, that we need to actually anchor ourselves and be activated for in order to actually not be sort of hit too hard by it. So that's again another level of this work I'm doing. We were told that if we had 144,000 people fully activated, that is a 12-strand activated template, it would only need 144,000 to successfully make that transition. Otherwise, it means the only other alternative is to activate the entire planet up to the 5th strand of DNA, of multidimensional DNA, which is probably not feasible because that's. I mean, you can see most people are stuck in survival mode, and that's just not going to happen. Yep.
Sorry, Brendan, why 144,000?
I don't know.
I'll tell you why I'm asking, because in the last part of the Bible, when they talk about the apocalypse,
Yep.
it talks about 144,000
Yeah.
people. So I'm wondering if that's why they came up with it.
Look, Elaine Horowitz talks about that in the Healing Codes book as well, and I think there's something to it. Especially when it comes to prophecy and biblical stuff, I really keep it at arm's length until I get multiple correlations coming in from different angles and give me a reason to talk about it and really entertain it. So there seems to be something to it, and I'm going to talk to our friends more about that because they have their own perspective on the 144,000 thing. That's what they said to us. If we got 144,000 fully activated templates, that would be enough. So that's part of what I've been doing. I met these people 2 weeks ago, but I've been doing this stuff, activating people for, year and a half or 2 years or something. So I was going to be doing this work anyway, but now I have a slightly different context for it, and there's a number. It's like, oh, well, if we do 144,000, that's mission accomplished sort of thing. I'm like, okay, well, that's feasible, I don't have to get to every person on the planet, not going to happen. But yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. I'm not saying that I believe it 100%, but I'm willing to entertain it. Yeah. Any final questions before we sort of move into the activation? No? All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate it.